This is War Room Moments, the show that takes you around the world to share interviews with some of the most successful and most relevant people on the planet, hear their stories, and get the most important business lessons they have learned on their road to success, and get exclusive advice on how to implement their success into your life and business. War Room Moments is brought to you by the Strategic Advisor Board. Here's your host, Jason Miller.
Welcome to the War Room. Today we have a very special guest today. Jayden, welcome to the show today. It's awesome to have you as a part of the show today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, awesome stuff. Well, hey, what I like to always do first is, because I'm really terrible about introducing people, and I figure you probably know yourself better than I do. So if you could just high level tell the audience who you are and what your superpower is.
Yeah, so my name is Jayden Aubryn. I use they, them pronouns. And I am, it's always such a big question. Who am I? Really, I'm just a human who's trying to make an impact. I'm a social worker and a therapist and a consultant. And I'm also a dancer. It's a really big part of me. Um, and I would say my superpower is probably my ability to show up for people, right? To just be there. I'm very much a Hufflepuff, for my Harry Potter fans. So loyalty is super important to me and just being there for my community.
Yeah, it's amazing how just showing up sometimes makes all the difference, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's all people want. They just want somebody to show up and be there. That's a huge part of life. It's a big part of business, and it's a human thing. I always say, let's stop being human doings and start being human beings like we were designed to be.
Oh, 100%.
So for sure. Well, I'm curious as to, did you come from a family of entrepreneurs, professionals, business people, stuff like that? How did that?
Not at all. Not at all. My mom was the first in our family. Oh, actually, that's not true. But my mom got a bachelor's degree, and my dad had an associate's. But both really struggled with employment for most of their life. My mom was on disability for most of my life. Um, and I was very much taught to like be a teacher, maybe go into like political science. I grew up, inner city, Columbus, Ohio, grew up around all very like um, working class Black folks. We weren't taught that we could be anything that we wanted to be. So, starting a business, like being a consultant, like that was never on my mind at all. And, life just took me, one step after another. And I moved out to the West Coast in Seattle, met some very encouraging people. And there's like, I was like, it would be so great if I could just like have a business and do this thing and do that thing. And they were like, you can. It's completely possible. And I was like, what? Really? It is? Uh, and so a couple a couple of years ago, I looked into, how do I start an LLC, where the, beginning processes of that, figuring out how to get a bank account and all of that. And it's definitely been a self-taught journey these past couple of years.
Yeah, interesting. What we're, growing up the way you did, though, influence wise, do you think that influence that you had growing up with your folks and other leaders that might have surrounded you, so on, so do you think that is a contributor to you wanting to break that mold?
Mm, I think that growing up, I saw a lot of injustice. I saw a
Mm.
lot of people struggling, and I saw a lot of systems that were not helpful. And I saw a lot of people in pain. And I wanted to help fix that, right? I wanted to be a part of that solution. And so, in that way, it was definitely an influence. And I think a lot of my journey as an adult has been with my skill sets, what are the best ways I can do that? Like, what ways can I have the most influence? And I didn't really start getting some of those ideas until later in adulthood.
Yeah, the area of like real high performance people is often steeped in life experiences that weren't always good, right? Like, for instance, I know many, many high performers that were in sports, they were in, military settings, so on and so forth. And those are all forged in fire that then created, what they ended up doing later on in their life in the business world. So, and it's in us, there's no doubt, it's in most human beings to have that entrepreneurial spirit, right? I mean, if you strip all of the things away in our lives and we didn't have homes and we grocery stores and all that stuff, what are we? We are basically foragers. Foragers are entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. And I think that if, a big part for me was not being encouraged as a kid.
Mm,
And, I got encouraged as an adult. And I wonder, if I was encouraged as a child, if that was something that was more accessible to my community, would I have entered this path differently or earlier? So, yeah, definitely, if we're given the choice, I think there's a lot more entrepreneurs out there.
yeah, no doubt about it. So let's kind of skip forward now into, so you made this transition in your life, you decided to start a business. What was that transition like for you? And then bring us up to date where you are right now.
Yeah. So, the transition was definitely a slow one.
Mm,
So I was working, a 9 to 5 in a nonprofit, doing community mental health, serving the population experiencing homelessness and severe mental health. And that was quite draining. So instead, I went and got into a group practice where I was providing just outpatient mental health therapy. And in that job, I was only working 4 days a week, 4 10s. And that's when I first started my business and got the LLC and started to do more consulting work. And so I do DEI consulting with a trauma-informed lens. So providing trainings for how can you make yourself as an individual or your organization, your strategic plan, um, you know, better within the realms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how can we look at that from a trauma-informed perspective? It's not just oh, don't be oppressive, don't be racist. Like it's way more nuanced than that. We need to talk about the feelings of anxiety, the fears of, losing your power, all of those things. They're real fears, and how can we actually address them so that you or your business can work towards your goals? So I started doing more strategic planning, trainings, coaching in that first year when I first made my business, and then about a year later, I decided to leave my group practice and do therapy individually. So my business eventually became TISE Consulting and Therapy. So I'm also providing psychotherapy with my specialties are complex trauma and borderline personality disorder, and doing groups, and then also providing like more accessible ways for people to access resources because there's definitely a shortage of therapists and you can only
mm,
see so many clients in a day. So I have like a self-paced therapy guide, I have a text to therapist hotline, and a few other like workshops and stuff that I like to put on. So yeah, it was a very like slow process, but we are here, and I'm really excited about it.
you're showing up, right?
Yeah, I'm trying.
I love that, showing up. It's a key to any business, right? And you have to show up. And it's interesting that, the DEI conversation, it gets misconstrued a lot of times. It's really a deep conversation, right? When it comes to DEI. And I mean, I'm steeped in a background of military. I did 23 years in the military. And the conversation isn't always about equity, right? Because everybody just looks at this equity thing, right? And like that's the key pillar. But if you're the wrong face for the seat, it has nothing to do with equity, right? And I think a lot of people look at it as just because I'm not qualified for the job doesn't mean I can't be. And there's this misconception of what that means. And it gets ran down this road that it's so misunderstood. We just released the 3 books on DE&I. Actually, DEI and A. And conversation is much deeper than most people want to take it. Because they're just looking at the surface level of things and they're not digging down into what it actually means. And it's just became another buzzword, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I think both sides of the spectrum are kind of at fault here, right? There's, the side where it's like, if you're not doing these things, you're wrong and you're a bad person. And that's way too simplistic, right? And then there's a side where like, I'm just not going to change, or I don't understand why I need to change these behaviors. And then they just get into an argument. Well, you don't understand, you're a bad person. Well, no, they don't understand. They don't understand. Let's have a conversation and sit down and explain. We can talk about, you know, what are the benefits of DEI, right? How does that help you as an individual and your community? How can we address the fears that you actually have? And none of this means that you're a bad person. There's like, you can't be perfect at DEI. We all have things. As a quick example, I recently got my tongue pierced, and when you get your tongue pierced, it swells up a lot, and it's very difficult to talk. And so I was like getting really anxious of like, oh no, do people think I'm stupid now because I'm talking, and like I'm talking like differently, and like right there, that's ableism, right? Because my intelligence hasn't gone down just because my speech is different. But the fact that I'm concerned other people might think that means that part of me believes that. Even if the other part of me doesn't, okay, we can just acknowledge that and then we can work on it and move forward. But when it's like, oh, if I have this thought, I'm a bad person and everyone's going to hate me, well, how do we have any conversations and how do we grow? So, yeah, I think that's really where I want to come in. And I think, growing up in the Midwest where there's a lot of different opinions and we do have these conversations pretty regularly, or at least we did when I was there. I don't know what's happening out there anymore. I think has really helped prepare me to like just sit with people and say like, okay, that fear is valid. And now let's talk about it and see, where we can maybe poke some holes and where maybe we can find some protection.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, right? That this is something I've found interesting around this conversation, right? There's always 2 sides, right? And it doesn't always have to be right or wrong. I mean, we're supposed to be entitled to, our opinion. That's what our country is founded on is, you have an opinion, right?
Yeah.
But, we've kind of gotten to this place where it's like, if you got an opinion and it's wrong, well, you're entitled to your wrong opinion then, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think that's not healthy, and that's not where we need to be going. And that's why we need people like you out leading that charge to like get us away from that kind of mentality of, let's sit at the table and have an honest discussion about it and then not complain about it, actually come together and create a solution, right?
Yeah.
Instead of acting like a bunch of babies at the table, right?
Right. Lean into discomfort. I think there's this idea now that if you're uncomfortable, you're being harmed. And that's not true. If you're uncomfortable, you're uncomfortable. Right. Yeah. And how can we start to learn to be uncomfortable with each other so that we don't actually harm each other?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's like a lot of the basis of life, right? Period. If you boil that whole conversation down to, sometimes you have to have an uncomfortable situation with your partner or your spouse or things
Mm-hmm.
like that, right? It's the same conversation, it's just reframed, right?
Exactly. Yes.
so, so it's just a different why. And, I'm not saying everybody's good at, doing that in their relationships and things like that, but probably the majority of people do a pretty good job at it. So why can't we take that same mentality and move it over into the other conversations,
Mm-hmm.
you know? But it doesn't help that we have a Congress full of babies either, right?
Oh
that's
yeah.
that's another conversation for another time.
For sure.
that's a whole episode. But as we have to just, in my opinion, is and your approach is let's knock this out one at a time, because if we can't get the whole, we got to get the few, and then the few will spread to many, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To me that just makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we all have the ability to have an impact,
Mhm.
right? And even if you impact one other person, right? They're also going to impact at least one other person, and it does spread out. And I think um, that when we focus on community, right, and we focus on healing together and coming together as a community and as a society, we really start to see these impacts that we have on each other. So now you know you have an impact. That's power. So what are you going to do with it, right? What type
Yeah,
of impact do you want to be spreading, and how can you be intentional?
yeah, for sure. I think that's, yeah, the impact is what it's all about, right? I mean, and when you look at impact in itself, right, to truly make a big impact is not a cheap venture, right? I mean, you can go door to door and do these things and have these conversations, but that impact takes a lot of time to do it that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where if we're able to bring communities together, um, that's huge, right? It's a huge thing. I mean, I wrote this book, right, that one, leadership and community, right?
Yeah.
Community is so important to most of these conversations, because a community together can have more impact outside of its own community, and then further, and you can make a bigger impact.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I've been preaching community since COVID started,
Oh
and
yeah.
just for the simple fact of that started like dying off, right? Because everybody like retreated into their own little home, and we lost this sense of community and this sense of communication, just like this right here. This is like really difficult for a lot of people right now.
Mm-hmm.
Just to like connect and have a conversation. And that's odd to me, because I'm a communicator, right? So, and I can tell you are too. You're very much a communicator too. So it's bringing all that narrative together to be able to make a big difference. And clearly that's what you're doing. That's pretty obvious. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I love that you bring up COVID and the impacts, because as people separated, this is like a quick dive into the work that I
Mm-hmm.
do and the focus I have. Um, that is all a trauma response, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we are traumatized, our ability to empathize and connect changes, right? And oftentimes we become more distant because the body wants to protect you from harm. And the body's like, well, other people could harm me, so I'm just going to stay away. And it was COVID that was so true for a while. We really was like, if I talk to a person, I might die and also kill my grandma, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so we learned that being near people is harmful. The opposite of trauma is empathy, right? When we have empathy, we start to heal trauma. You know, trauma is a molecular biological thing, right? It has a lot to do with like energy in your body and, you know, changes in your brain functioning. To start to undo that at a biological molecular level, we have to practice empathy. We have to heal in community. And so, you know, if we take this at a really large scale, of course, COVID traumatized a whole bunch of people, and now we're having trouble connecting. And our world is getting even more and more divided because the trauma just keeps impacting it all, and we keep separating. So, um, I like to have this trauma focus of how do we deal with the fear of connecting with another person, right? How do we deal with the fear of connecting with a different race? Or you know, queer folks or people with different abilities, right? How do we actually deal with that fear? Because that fear is real and is at a biological level, and the way to undo it is empathy and compassion. It's not to shame people into being
Mm,
better, it's to be compassionate.
yeah. Kindness is free.
Yeah.
Doesn't cost anything to be kind. I tell my son that every morning before he goes to school. It's
Mhm.
always, have a great day at school today, son, and remember kindness is free, right?
Yes.
So, you know, and it's planting those seeds today in the younger generation. And, they're a lot
Mhm.
smarter than me. He's 7 years old and he's already smarter than I am. So
Yeah.
something to be said about that. But anyway, a lot of really, really good points of impact in that discussion we just had. But for those listeners that didn't quite get it, right? What would be a few of the things that you would want to have as a leave behind for the audience to go, look, this is what I think you need to do,
Mhm.
right? To make an impact.
Yeah. Um, I would say number one, lead with compassion and curiosity,
Mm,
right? If someone has said something that you don't like or is offensive, um, ask them about their perspective, right? Let's ask in a compassionate way versus immediately judging and being angry, right? And I think the other big thing is we are capable of amazing, amazing things. And sometimes we just need someone to tell us that we are. What if we look at science fiction, right? How much of science fiction has actually influenced like science and what we develop? If we can view it, if we can dream it, if we can envision it, we can do it, right? So as you go about your life, if you're thinking about your job, if you're thinking about how you show up in community, if you're thinking about the future of this country, what do you really want? Envision that and then figure out how to make it happen because it is possible.
yeah, absolutely. Anything's possible. I truly believe that. I truly believe that the human dimension is so dynamic that,
Hmm.
I mean, look where we've came just in a few hundred years.
Yeah.
A few hundred years. So think about what we can do in the next 1,000 years. I mean, it's almost, you can't even almost even wrap it around your head, right?
Yeah.
If we were able to stay on the same impact level as we are in the last couple hundred years and growth wise as technology, all these different things, man, what's that going to look like?
Yeah.
I mean, it's actually a little bit scary, but I guess we won't be around for it, so we won't know any better. But anyway, so man, great pieces of advice to give. How do people get a hold of you? How do you want people to contact you to work with you?
Yes. So my information is consistent across boards. It's TISE Consulting and Therapy. That is TISE. It stands for Trauma Informed Social Equity. So TISE Consulting and Therapy. My website is tiseconsultingandtherapy.com. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok with the same handles. And my Gmail is also tiseconsultingandtherapy@gmail.com. So any one of those or, good old Google, TISE Consulting and Therapy. One of those things should pop up, and you'll be able to find ways to contact me on any of those platforms.
Awesome. Well, I hope many of the listeners, we have about 5,000 to 10,000 listeners per day. So somebody needs you today. So hopefully they reach out to you and make that step to do that today. So yeah, the kind of the final closing thought-provoking question, as you can see, we don't really do a Q&A on this show because it's more of value is driven by conversation, right? And the conversation we had was very, very valuable to the audience. But for all the $1 million in the world, right?
Yeah.
If you were to invite anybody into this show, dead or alive, any point in time in history, to either join us or participate, who would have you loved to have here and why them?
Okay. It is going to be my answer, Queen Latifah.
Queen Latifah.
Yes. She has been an inspiration to me since I was a child. Seeing a Black queer, even though she wasn't out when I was a child, but now she is. It's great. Just phenomenally talented and phenomenally intelligent individual who has been able to maintain her roots and continue to give back to the community where she was from. And I think this is a concern for a lot of people of Black middle folk, people that I've talked to who grew up poor and working class. We don't want to lose our roots. And as we transition out of working class into middle class, there can be a disconnect. And so being able to keep that community tie is really, really important to me. And I love listening to Queen Latifah talk and see how she's able to do that and always tie it back to her roots. So yeah, that I would love to be in conversation with her.
She's an amazing actress. I will, for sure. What was the show she's just been doing recently? Equalizer, right? Yeah. I mean, you talk about the spin-off from the old Equalizer to this one. I think hers is better anyway.
Yeah, agreed.
For sure. Because I actually watch it every now and again. But anyway, yeah, amazing conversation. Thank you for taking the time to stop by here and share some of your knowledge with our audience. I always like to say there's 168 hours in a week, and every one of those hours is important. And, you shared all that value for 30 plus minutes with this audience. We're very grateful for that time. So thank you for that.
I feel honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to War Room Moments with your host, Jason Miller. Please leave your feedback and visit strategicadvisorboard.com to get the latest and greatest business advisement on the planet. Follow us on social media for updates, and we'll see you on the next episode.